Well, hi everyone. This is a different sort of behind the scenes tour. Here we're sitting in our radio studio. So we're at the Creation Museum. These are the offices that are sort of behind the Creation Museum. And we have many special rooms in that area. One of them is our radio studio. So this is the radio studio, and we have the control room next door. We'll give you a little tour of that in a moment. But I wanted to give you a little trip down history lane. Because we're going to talk about the radio program. Actually, we just recorded 65 radio programs, and we usually do them in one lot like that, sometimes over 2 days, but often just in one day. 65, they're a minute long, but the radio program began millions of years ago, wasn't it, Mark?
How about
This is
October
Mark Looy.
1994?
Mark Looy is one of the co-founders of Answers in Genesis. He, along with Mike Zovath and myself, were the three that came out from California, from San Diego area, to northern Kentucky to begin the ministry in 1994.
Right. And we moved here for the weather from San Diego.
That's what you say. So I first met Mark. I was trying to figure out when I first met him. I think it would have been 1981 or 1982 in San Diego. So I've known you for a long time, long before he even met his wife, actually. And when I first met him, is at one of those radio studios in El Cajon. It was sort of in what I call a dingy part of town. Dark,
Sometimes you call it drug-infested.
Drug-infested. It was that sort of area. I was scared to go there. And in those days, it was reel-to-reel, wasn't digital. And I often describe it to people as first time I met Mark, and he interviewed me, actually, because I was over on speaking tour in America from Australia, and so he wanted to interview me as this guest speaker. And while he was interviewing me, and it was a radio station, he was running the whole thing. And he sort of reminds me, if you've ever seen the Wizard of Oz movie, when the curtains pull back and you see the Wizard of Oz and he's there and he's turning this and that and doing this and doing that and doing all these things at the same time, that was Mark. He reminds me of the Wizard of Oz. So that was my first encounter with you, Mark. Do you remember that?
That dingy, drug-infested part of San Diego called El Cajon. And here we are recording this Facebook Live in a radio recording studio.
Exactly. And we actually worked for the Institute for Creation Research with Dr. Henry Morris and Dr. Dwayne Gersh for 7 years, actually. I worked for them. And during that time, we actually did a radio program. We started the radio program. I remember it was called Back to Genesis.
I would interview you briefly, as well as Dr. John Morris of ICR, and we had a weekly program called Science, Scripture, and Salvation, and sometimes I interviewed you for that 15-minute program.
But for our I think it was a 90-second program originally when we first started, and they all had to be scripted. I used to write all the scripts myself, and you would edit them. And I don't know how many we did. How many do you think we did back then?
Oh, I know. I just counted it up recently. Here, for the last 25 plus years, we've done almost 7,000 radio programs here in this northern Kentucky area. I don't know how many we did back in San Diego.
2,000 to 3,000?
Maybe, yeah. A total, we might be close to 10,000.
10,000 radio programs. Can you imagine that? And they all get scripted, every one of them. So you can see here, this is actually a bundle of 65 scripts, and we just recorded those. And so we now have someone that helps us write them, and then they go to Mark, and then Mark edits them. Then Mark sends them to me for a final edit. Then I send them back to Mark, and then we get them all ready, and we come in the studio here. And so what we do is we'll sit here, put on my earphones. We have our controller next door, our AV person there, and he's working on the digital board there. And so Mark follows me and he times everything. And he will tell me, that's too short, that's too long. For instance, we've got to do an introduction. It's got to be only, how many seconds?
7 seconds.
7 seconds. And if it's 6 or it's 8, he stops and we have to do it again. And if I go through and he thinks something's not conversational, when you read these scripts, you have to be conversational. So you've got to sound like you're just speaking it. And if he thinks it's not conversational, he will stop me. And so we have to make sure they're perfect. Well, as close to perfect as we can.
Yeah,
right?
people may not understand that writing a radio script is very different than writing, let's say, an article for a magazine. You have to write it for the ear. You have to sound
Right.
conversational. That's why great authors of books are not necessarily good script writers for
Right.
movies. It's a different type of a literary form.
And I have a different sort of writing style anyway that Mark's had to put up with for how many years now?
We've known each other almost 40 years.
And when I write, I just write as I speak. And so I write articles and books and so on, and Mark calls it, what do you call it?
Yeah, well, Ken just types and types and types it. He'll type 10,000 words in maybe 15 minutes, and I call it stream of consciousness typing. And then he hits send. He doesn't go and review. I have to go through it. I spend more time polishing it, adding punctuation marks than.
Yeah, a lot of your stuff is just preferential. It's not real good editing. I mean,
I'm biting my tongue.
so I will start this, and microphone set up, earphones on. I can hear myself. I can hear our controller next door if he needs to say anything to me. And so I will start. We have the introduction. God and the coronavirus. This is Ken Ham with biblical answers on why God allows disease, suffering, and death. And if it's not exactly 7 seconds, you sort of get used to it. And for a lot of them, we get it right. But some of them, he'll say go slower, or some go a little faster. But to get that exactly 7 seconds every time, we do it a lot. And I mean, they're scripted to do that. But certain words can take longer to say, and so.
And you might have a little pause in there too that drags it out. Yeah.
And then we'll go on. Years ago, I wrote a book on why God permits disease and death. It was after the 9/11 terrorist attacks and a death in my family. Now, the issue of death and suffering, and so I go through and do the whole 60 seconds here, and it's got to be 60 seconds. And our script writer who helps us do this, Avery, and she's very talented, but sometimes words have a number of different syllables, and so some words are longer and shorter than others. So when you get to the end, and not always, but now and then, I have to edit on the fly. In other words, I see, uh-oh, and Mark's doing all sorts of symbols and things, and symbols like this, and we sort of get to know what they mean, or sometimes I forget what they mean. But anyway, then I know, uh-oh, I've got to stretch this out. Uh-oh, we're going to run too long here. I have got to summarize this sentence. I realize, I'm saying to myself as I'm reading this, I'm not going to make it to the end here. I'm going to have to cut this short. I'll just have to summarize that sentence, and you sort of do it on the fly. And there's sort of an art in doing that, but, we've done it so long.
Yeah, those signals are so important, and you have to be out at 47 seconds because we have an announcer who later will add about a 12-second close. That's what I did for years and years. I did the open and the close, but then we found a younger voice and a female voice, someone in Tennessee. So I'm no longer the voice of the radio program with you.
So, yeah, it was interesting. I remember being at some conference somewhere, and someone said they recognized Mark from the voice, not from looking at him, from the voice. As he said, he's really got a face for radio. Is that right, Mark?
That is such an old joke, and I've heard it a million times. It's water off the duck's back.
And Mark is nationally and internationally unknown. Yeah.
That's my joke, too, which he just stole.
So these 60-second radio programs, they used to be 90 seconds, but when we started at Answers in Genesis here in Kentucky, we made them 60 seconds, shortened them. Actually, it is harder to do a 60-second radio program than it is, I think, to do a 5-minute one.
Yeah, imagine I'll throw you a question like, what happened to the dinosaurs? And he's got to answer it in about 47 seconds. So, but he can do it because he's not only fast-paced, but he's got some of these teachings down to little kernels of truth.
And so we script them all to make sure we get at the right time. But even then, you have to do some editing on the fly as we're going through. So there's a lot of work in putting this together. You know the amazing thing? We've received many testimonies over the years from people who have turned on that radio program. They've been in their car, sitting on a freeway in Los Angeles somewhere or wherever it is, and they're hearing the radio station play the 60-second spot. And there are people who told me that because of that, they went to our website. People have been saved as a result of it. People who've been encouraged. People who've been turned on to our ministry, visited the Ark, the Creation Museum. over the years, we've had many even salvation testimonies, which amazes me. A minute program, and yet the Lord has used that to save someone.
Yeah. I come across many people as I travel around the country who say their first connection with us was not the website, and maybe not even going to one of our seminars, but hearing that little bit of truth on radio, and they got on our mailing list, and some of them become very, very substantial donors, all because they linked to us by radio.
Now, things have changed over the years, of course. It used to be the radio program was sent out on a CD, and eventually it got sent up by satellite, and now a lot of stations are just automated, and so there's a lot of differences. But we're on about 1,000 outlets in the US, and it's also translated into Spanish now too, isn't it?
Yeah, the program in Spanish, it's a longer one because I guess it takes more words to try to convey the same truths that we do in English, and that's called Respuestas en Génesis. Last time I checked, I think we're on about 100 Spanish-speaking stations throughout America, both Americas, South America and North America.
Now, I think for Spanish, don't they have to even cut these scripts down a little bit more?
Yeah, I haven't
translate
seen the
them?
process of it.
Yeah.
But I understand that it's getting a lot of great reviews.
Yeah, I've heard it's got fantastic reviews. So, by the way, we never used to have this little carton of Clorox sitting here, but things have changed. And so now...
And we're keeping our 6
seen it,
feet
right.
distance
6
during this
feet.
time.
Yeah, I try to keep my distance from you anyway.
Well,
Yeah.
part of it's your Vegemite breath, but that's another topic.
Mark and I have known each other. How long you say we've known each other?
It's almost 40 years now.
40 years.
Before I met my wife, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I still remember that first time that I met you in that radio station. I really do. Well, what I wanted to show people is a little behind the scenes here, so they can see the studio here where we record here at the Creation Museum. And I'm going to go out the door here and show you the control panel in here and the digital board. And this is the control room, actually. So let's do that. So,
Right.
Mark, I was going to, there was something else I was going to ask you too. When we first moved to Kentucky, didn't we have a studio we built in your house, in the basement of your house?
That's
Then
right.
we used a local church.
We used a local church, and I remember because the two of us were in this very small studio at this church, Calvary Baptist Church,
Right.
in Covington, and we had to open the door every 5 minutes because it got
so
very
hot.
warm in there with the equipment.
Social distancing wouldn't work in that room now.
So, but we're grateful to the church for that, and then we created a studio in the basement of our home, and
Right.
now we've been using this studio for about 15 years now. Much
Yeah,
better.
Much better, definitely.
All
So
right.
let's go for a little walk here.
And I'll keep my distance.
And, you keep your distance, yeah. So we'll go out here. And we are in the offices at Answers in Genesis. And I'm going to go in here. See, that tells us we were recording our radio program. All right. And we'll go in here. We have one of our AV techs in here. And we just recorded 65 radio programs. And so now you go through and edit them here, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
So
Yep.
you can take out all, if I have a stumble or anything.
Yep. So I have all of the recording in here, and then we will go through and trim off all the parts that were in between recordings, and then we'll get it cut down to the 60-second mark that it needs to be.
And if I made a stumble and then went back and redid that sentence, you just edit that in and it just sounds normal.
Yep. Yep. We can make it sound perfectly normal.
And I want to tell you something. I have no idea how to use anything on here. I know nothing about any of this.
That's all right. Sometimes I don't either.
But that's why you guys are here.
Yep.
So, see, I don't want to know anything about this. Then people would expect me to, do something with it.
Mostly what these do are just control panels. So when I'm working in Pro Tools, these faders just allow me to make quick adjustments, and I don't have to use my mouse to try to make a fine adjustment on the screen. I can just do a really fine-tuned adjustment, and it's just a lot easier and quicker and streamlines the flow of the work.
And so once we get all 65 radio programs edited, then we, put them up on satellite or do something with them, or put them on the web, or whatever we do.
We send them out to the radio stations and the web, and then they can air from there.
They download them and,
Yep.
and air it from there.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thanks. What's up on this board up here?
So these are just different things. I've got this one here is just an EQ, so I can change the tone of the voice. The highlight certain things or remove certain things that aren't quite what they need to sound like. And then this is just a multi-band compressor, so I can bring up some of the quieter parts of the voice and bring down some of the louder parts of the voice and just kind of normalize it. So.
Okay, I'm glad you know what you're doing. And I know you make it sound good. You guys make us look good and sound good, which is really good. Well, thanks. Well, Mark, how many did you say we've done radio programs since we've been in Kentucky?
It's approaching about 7,000
About
now.
7,000. So, and it takes us, what, 2 to 3 hours to record the 65?
Yeah, and
Sort of
people might
depends.
wonder why we record so many at a time, but Ken is gone sometimes 40% of the time. And so it's just convenient for us to record about 3 months' worth of programming in one sitting.
So, well, with that, I hope you enjoyed another little behind-the-scenes look here at our radio studio, our control room here, and a little bit of the background information on the radio programs, how they're produced. You know, somebody just switches on a radio, you just hear that program, they don't tend to think of all that goes into making that happen and work, and there's just so many steps involved. And I think people enjoy hearing about all that to know what is behind the scenes here at the ministry. So that's just one little aspect, just our daily radio program and all that it takes to be able to get that accomplished. So with that, thanks, and join us again for another behind the scenes in the future.